Hi everyone, welcome back to My Service Dog and Me. I'm Kate, and today I want to talk to you about management versus training. What's the difference and how they work together? Because not understanding management is absolutely one of the biggest pitfalls that we see that prevents handlers from making the progress that they'd like to make both in their service dog's formal training as well as in sort of any house manners, behavior challenges you're having there. Now, this question was actually asked by one of our academy members just on the Q&A we did last week. And I thought that it was such a great question and we had such a good conversation about it that I wanted to turn it into a YouTube video because I realized we probably didn't have a YouTube video specifically on this. So, let's start here. When you have anything in your dog's behavior that you would like to change, whether that be pulling on the leash, not coming when called, or something like getting into the garbage or jumping on guests, you basically have three options. You can do nothing and live with the problem. You can manage it, which we're going to talk about and define here in a second. Or you can train through it, teaching your dog what they should do instead. These are kind of the three options that we have whenever it comes down to, I don't like what I'm seeing from my dog. What should I do about it? We have these three options. I want to define management before we go further here. Management is basically setting up our dog's environment so that the behavior in question simply cannot happen. So it's not really about teaching the dog anything. It is about just setting things up so physically the behavior just doesn't happen. So it often uses crates or baby gates or putting things behind closed doors or preventing access to things or just not going to certain locations. These are examples of management. And we're going to get into specific examples here in a second. Now, management has it serves a couple purposes for us. One is it can be a long-term solution to some training challenges. So we're going to talk about that. For some training challenges, you really can just set up your dog's environment so the behavior simply doesn't happen and leave it at that. It also, though, prevents rehearsal and reinforcement of the problem behavior while you work on a training plan. Because training, one of the reasons that any training plan often fails to work is because a management protocol was not put in place with it. We're going to talk about garbage, getting into the garbage here in a minute. So we're just going to stick with that example to keep everything nice and clean. But every time, let's say I have an adolescent dog in my house who's constantly getting into the garbage. Every time he gets into the garbage, he rehearses that behavior, which means he gets better at it. Every time he gets into the garbage, he gets reinforced for that behavior, which means he's building a reinforcement history, which means it's going to be harder and harder to change. And because the brain is a very plastic organ, it physically changes based on the experiences that our dogs have, especially during adolescence. So to learn more about that, which is really important, we have our free adolescence webinar. The link is at the link in the description below. If you have a puppy or an adolescent, you need to go watch that because there is stuff in there you absolutely need to know. But every time let's just stick with adolescent dog, gets into the garbage, again, he rehearses the behavior so he gets better at it. He builds a stronger and stronger reinforcement history so it becomes harder to train through because he already has all this reinforcement for that behavior. And it also will physically change his brain because the neural pathways used to get into the garbage will literally become stronger. So how do we choose whether it's a training challenge that we can just live with, manage, or we need to train through? We can live with it if it's safe for everyone involved, you don't mind it, and it won't impact future service work. You can manage it if managing the behavior long-term works for you and it won't impact service work. And you need to train through it if it is a safety concern, long-term management isn't an option, or the behavior in question does in fact affect service work. So let's go through a couple of examples so you can kind of see this all fit together. So first we're going to talk about getting into the garbage. Live with it. The first option is live with it. This is not a safe or realistic option for a dog who's getting into the garbage, right? There's a very legitimate safety concern when a dog is consistently getting into the garbage. Dogs who do that consistently almost always end up at the vet at some point, right? So living with it when we're talking about getting into the garbage is really not a realistic option. Now, we can place the garbage out of reach. This is an easy, safe, and a long-term option. So if we have a dog who's getting into the garbage and we put the garbage behind a closed door, in a cabinet, in a closet, somewhere that the dog can't get to it, the behavior literally cannot happen, right? It can't happen because the dog doesn't have access to the garbage. Now, because when you're training a service dog out in public, you will go through very specific steps to teach your dog not to eat garbage in that capacity, not to eat anything off the floor in that capacity, not to eat anything that, other people try to give your dog when you're out in public, which is all stuff we teach in our academy. Your dog has a very clear structure when they're out in public, and I have personally just not seen it impact service work because either way, you're going to go through a very specific training process to teach your dog not to do that when they're out in public. So you could long-term manage this behavior. Now, you could train through it. In this particular example, training through this particular behavior is a lot of work. And the behavior doesn't really impact service work in most cases, like I just explained. So in my home, we manage this behavior forever. We just put the garbage underneath our sink in a cabinet with a baby lock on it because then the human toddler can't get to it, and neither can any of the dogs. We just manage this behavior long term. All of my dogs have excellent recalls, excellent leave-its, and don't eat things that we come across out and about. And my service dogs that I train don't eat things that they come up against out and about in public. Now, if you want to train through this behavior, you still have to put the management plan in place while you're training. Without a management plan, your training plan for getting into the garbage will fail. It will. It will fail. So what you have to do is while you are working through that training plan with your dog, you also have to have the garbage out of reach so that when you aren't actively doing a training session, your dog can't get to the garbage, reinforce himself, build that neural pathway, build that reinforcement history, and all the things. So even when you train through a problem behavior, you still need a management plan while you are working through that behavior. Okay, so let's talk about pulling on the leash because this is one that comes up a lot for service dog handlers, right? Living with it is not usually safe, first of all. The only way that just ignoring pulling on the leash is safe is with a dog who can't pull over the handler. And even then we start to say, is it safe for the dog to constantly be pulling? So then they'd have to wear a harness. And then again, so there's all these safety considerations when it comes to pulling on a leash, right? But this also directly impacts public access. We cannot have service dogs that are constantly pulling on the leash. And of course, a task where they pull is totally different. If the dog has been trained to do a task that involves pulling, totally different. But as far as just heeling around is concerned, the dog needs to not be pulling on the leash, right? So management for this would include things like not walking the dog where they might pull, or using training equipment that helps to prevent the pulling, which still needs training, okay? And it's not a forever solution because it directly impacts public access. So we can't just avoid places that our dogs might pull forever because service dogs need to be able to go places. We can't live with it because we can't have the handler pulled around. We can use training aids to help with pulling theoretically forever. Like I have handlers who work their dogs consistently even though they're fully trained on gentle leaders or no pull harnesses or whatever. But those dogs have still been trained to a level that when that training aid is removed, the dog will still heal. I have a portion on my public access test that very specifically tests for that, where we remove any of that equipment and we expect the dog to still heal. So at that point, it's really acting as a safety net that helps the handler to feel safe, as opposed to something that's actually maintaining the healing training. And I have very strong feelings on this, which is something we could certainly chat about in our Let's Talk Service Dogs live series that we do inside of our free Facebook group, Train Your Service Dog with Confidence. You can also find that in the description below. And we could certainly talk about this maybe during one of those live streams where people can ask questions. But I have very strong feelings about service dogs should be able to be under control and in heel position regardless of the equipment that's on them once they are fully trained. However, we can certainly use certain pieces of equipment to help with the training process or to help with the management process. So really though, the only option we have for a service dog is to train through it. That's really the only option for a service dog in training, is to be working towards training through it. However, again, we still have to manage it in the meantime. So while we are working on healing, on not pulling on the leash, we're going to have to find ways to manage that. That may include bringing in a piece of equipment. It may include not walking the dogs in very many locations until the healing training is solid. It might include teaching casual leash skills, which is something we go very much into in our foundations course, where we teach the difference between a casual walk, a freedom walk, and healing. And healing is something we do in the academy. And these are all various ways that we manage us and the dog so that the dog knows the difference between when they need to be in heel position and when they don't. And it is also something that helps prevent the pulling behavior while we teach the dog what we do want. So again, it doesn't really matter that you're going to train through it and not manage it long term. You still have to manage it while you train through it. When I was working with pet dogs, because I spent a lot of years working with pet dogs before service dogs, and then of course there was the overlap period where I was doing both, the only people that I couldn't help were the people who refused to do the management protocol or refused to do their homework. But usually it was the management protocol. So they wouldn't stop walking their dogs in specific locations or whatever managements we had put in place. Without the management protocol, the training plan isn't going to work. That's just how it works. And it doesn't really matter what training method or system that you're working with. You have to prevent access to these things that are reinforcing the unwanted behavior while you put the training plan in place. So if you have any questions about this, the best place to ask them is in our free Facebook group, Train Your Service Dog with Confidence. You can find all the things at the link in the description below, and I will see you in the next video. Have a great day.